My parents chose the bad time to move down here, or I could have had college for free, but, this was their choice. It was 3 feet of snow on the back porch, and Dad said, we're going to Florida. So, sometimes things like that just happen, but like I said, I just feel bad for the kids now that are maybe very intelligent children that maybe aren't getting their full potential because of the fact that maybe if they do move to another state, then they're really far behind the state that they've moved to, or they go to college and they're really far behind everybody that's going to college. I mean, it just doesn't seem to be an even playing field. And again, I understand that there's a whole lot of things at the federal level that I don't understand. But, just chatting with you and giving you one person's opinion.
You talk about, the discrepancies between state to state.
Mm-hmm.
We have the discrepancies here from state to state, and then you look internationally, our students, they're just not getting a competitive education.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're talking all the way up from grade school through college,
Mm-hmm.
and we're starting to see the repercussions of this more and more. And unfortunately, this is a generational situation where the fixes that we can make today, if I could fix everything come January,
Mm-hmm.
in the 111th Congress, that you still wouldn't see the results for, at a minimum 10, 15 years,
Mm-hmm.
as the kids cycle through the system. But it's a problem that we have to address. And I think one of the big issues that we have now across the board is that unfortunately there's a bit of it's always been the case that America, because of our geographic isolation and kind of our cultural dominance, we've always been a little bit myopic about what's going on in the rest of the world. And in a lot of ways, the rest of the world in many areas is moving ahead of us, and we're not aware of it. And education is one of those areas where we're going to pay the price for that.
Well, I mean, just look at a lot of the people that are in European schools. Not only do they have to do like what would be considered our 12th grade, but then they're required to do 2 years of college or something beyond that. It doesn't just, here you get a piece of paper and you're done. I mean, they're continuing. And we'll just look at how many people from other countries are coming to our colleges, and they're getting the best educations instead of our students necessarily getting the best education, because they probably have higher scores that make them more attractive to the colleges. So I mean, just look at this woman in Al-Qaeda that was educated over here, that they just picked up. And to me, we need to take care of the people that are U.S. citizens as well as the people of other countries. We need to, we can be their big brother, but we got to be our own big brother first, I think, is one of the major factors that I'm feeling at this particular point. I mean, we're spending millions and billions of dollars over in Iraq, but when is it that we need to be there, and when is it that we've got important things to take care of at home as well?
And this is more and more people that I talk to. As you can go back to our first president, George Washington, who very famously warned against foreign entanglements.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is most of my adult life I've spent traveling around the world. I was in the Army for 5 years. I was in Germany, Central Europe, and then I was in Korea and traveled around Asia. Then I worked for an international wireless company. We set up networks, North America, Europe, South America, Africa.
Mm-hmm.
So I've spent a lot of time traveling. And the problem that we have is that we tend to untangle ourselves in problems
that aren't really our business.
Yeah, we take sides in conflicts. The side that we need to be taking is the side of justice and fair play, and and we need to be acting as honest brokers in a lot of these conflicts. In the situation with Russia and Georgia is a perfect example. Georgia provoked Russia. Russia's response was appalling, there's no question about it. But if you look at a lot of the political rhetoric that's coming out of the administration now and coming from some of the candidates, basically we've decided to take Georgia's side when Georgia has behaved just as badly as Russia, and it's to the detriment of the Georgian people and to the people in South Ossetia. What we should be doing is we should be acting as fair brokers in a situation like that. And I mean, there is, you know, in that particular situation, I mean, we backed the secession of Kosovo, and because the majority of people wanted out there with South Ossetia and the breakaway areas of Georgia. They had a referendum, and I believe it was 99% of the people in South Ossetia said that they wanted to be part of the Russian Federation. And, you know, we're ignoring that. And I'm not taking the Russian side, but I'm saying what we should be doing is not taking anybody's side. And if we did that, we wouldn't be dumping billions of dollars into places like Iraq. We wouldn't have a lot of problems that we have in the Middle East. You know, we should be friendly with everybody, but entangled with nobody.
Well, it's just like I ran into a friend today. His son just came home from Iraq, and they already know that he's going back to Afghanistan. Okay, so we're just moving everything from Iraq over to Afghanistan. And I don't want this to sound like I'm not patriotic. I mean, I thank every one of those people that go over there to fight. But by the same token, and I know there's a lot of things that the federal government doesn't tell us that we don't know about. So, I mean, I'm not saying that I'm necessarily making a totally informed decision, but do we need to be the world's big brother on everything? I mean, if two kids are fighting, does mom and dad have to get involved? You know, sometimes they need to just fight it out. I mean, because there's certain areas of the world that, you know, you get over into Israel and all of those other places. They've been fighting for 2,000 years. Does anybody think they're ever going to stop fighting? I mean, are they really going to? I mean, they just have differences of opinion, and sometimes that happens.
Well, you know, and again, I've spent some time in that area, and you know, and that's a good example of a situation where if we were more fair in the way that we deal with the problems, we could resolve a lot of the situations, a lot of the issues there. The problem that we have is that we tend to back the tyrants that are friendly to us and oppose the tyrants that have an issue with our policies. But we're not really going there and promoting freedom and democracy like we're saying. It's whoever is serving our short-term interests. And this is a big problem that people in the Middle East have. And I'm not just talking with Israel. You know, a classic example would be like Egypt and Saudi Arabia have two of the worst human rights records, you know, in the world, and we back them wholeheartedly. And yet, exactly. But yet, at the same token, we go after Syria and Iran over their human rights records, when in fact, Syria's human rights record is probably better than Saudi Arabia and Egypt. And I'm not saying that because Syria is a wonderful country. But I'm saying that the problem is there's that hypocrisy there. People pick up on it. You know, in the situation that we have now with Russia and Georgia, it's very difficult for us to say anything because we invaded Iraq unilaterally without going through international channels. And when we did that, basically, we set a precedent that strong states can pick on weaker states as long as they can get away with it. Right. So now what we're seeing is the kind of the blowback from that, and it's going to get worse. And what we have to do is we have to make sure that not just with the president, but we have to make sure that we have a Congress that's willing to hold the president to the rule of law, that's willing to hold the president to the standards of the Constitution, that's willing to recognize that we need to. If you go out acting like a thug, and you're the biggest guy in the block, eventually everyone is going to start acting the same way.
Well, I think we need to get back to basics. Like you said, go back to the Constitution, go back to our rights, go back to what our country was founded on, and you know, just try to simplify things a little bit. Because obviously with the dollar dropping the way it is, there's a lot of us that are extremely concerned about what's going to happen in our future.
And I've been saying this for years. The U.S. is a big Achilles heel is the dollar, because especially given the amount of foreign debt that we now have, it is entirely conceivable that a really traumatic event on the global scale, like for example an attack on Iran, would precipitate a series of events where you would see a rapid decline in the dollar, and then you would see countries like China starting to sell off their bonds, starting to sell off their bills, and you would actually see a hyperinflation spiral for the dollar, which nobody wants to see happen. I certainly don't. And this is why we talk about the economic issues. We talk about like drilling off the coast and everything. And these are all vitally important. But right now we've got a fire raging, you know, and that fire is the threat. I don't mean to sound melodramatic, but what the situation in the last week has really demonstrated is that we have, for the first time since the 40s, the threat of a world war breaking out again, because we've kind of systematically, over the last 8 years, or the last 7, 8 years, is we've kind of systematically undermined all the principles of international law that were set in place after World War II to prevent another world war from happening. And now Russia's deciding to flex its muscle. I have no doubt, unfortunately, that we have people in this administration that will decide to flex back. And what we have to recognize is that the problem that we have in this world, it's not Russian extremists, it's not Islamic extremists, it's not neocon extremists. The problem is that the majority of people in the world just want to get on with their lives, do business, and not have all this conflict. But we have extremists pretty much everywhere in every government that have sort of hijacked the system. And the only way that we can change that is that we've got to take back our government. We in the U.S., I mean, we set the standard for what democracy is all about. And I think, unfortunately, especially on the federal level, is we've kind of been hijacked by ideological extremists. And so, you know, one of the reasons I'm running with no party affiliation is because we need people that can go up there and not look at the partisan rhetoric, not go up there with ideological blinders on, that can go there and say, look, this is the Constitution, and this is what's good for America. I don't care about the Republicans, I don't care about the Democrats, let's make it happen.
Well, and that's just it. Like you said, they need to do what's right and not do something just because everybody else in the party's doing the same thing.
Yeah, and that's what runs, you know, it's the two things that run Washington, and they're interrelated now, is the PAC money, which you need in order to run the campaign. Look at Connie Mack has over $1 million now.
Angie.
The rest of us, we're in the tens of thousands. We're competing against him, and it's because, you know, in order to run, even for a congressional race, I mean, you need that. You have to have that big money. In order to get that big money, you have to have big money donors, and this is the corruption that's driving everything. And what's happened since the 90s is the lobbyists in Washington have basically been taken over by one party or the other. And so you have the partisan politics on top of the lobbyist money, on top of the corporate union money that's driving everything. And this is, we're not going to get away from that. And it's, you know, the problems with the insurance. You know, I appreciate a lot of what you're saying. I mean, I can hear you're really actually thinking about your customers. You're not, you know.
Well, I mean, we have to. Unfortunately, there's a lot of principles, it seems like, of a lot of people have changed completely, that everything is about making the next buck and all of that other stuff, and it goes into the government too. I mean, just look at, what is it that Obama and McCain have raised each about $200 million each to go for a job where you make $400,000 a year. Take that $200 million each and go feed a bunch of homeless people. I mean, you know, they're doing things that don't make sense. I mean, and I understand it used to be, I don't know that it still is, the most powerful position in the world, but by the same token, you know,
it's you look at it from a corporate point of view, and you know, when I worked in the wireless business, I worked for a small company, but our clients were all big companies. This is in the late '90s too. So, and some of our big clients were MCI WorldCom, a company called PSI Net, and particularly with the guys from MCI WorldCom, as I left at the end of '99 before the .com bust, and I remember watching the news every day for about a year. And I'd see somebody getting indicted, and I'd be like, "Hey, I had lunch with that guy in Naples." So, you know, so I've been around that environment, and
well, and it's like the oil companies. Look at them making record profits. they're not the only ones. State Farm is one of the insurance companies that's been making record profits. Well, if you're stepping on the people that got you to the place where you are, I mean, have a little compassion. You know, and then it goes into the Enrons of the world and things like that, where these guys are getting billion-dollar bonuses, and the people down below them have lost their entire life savings. Their entire life has changed in a moment, and there's no remorse there. There's no anything there. I mean,
and I can tell you from personal experience that that model is Enron. I don't think it's not an example of bad apples in the corporate world. I think Enron is emblematic of a way a large percentage of the corporate world works. You know, what you have is a situation that's driven from the shareholder level by quarterly earning reports and nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the executive level, it's keeping those quarterly earning reports up no matter what, and making sure that your bonuses, that you keep stock values up.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, there's no accountability at that level.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of this reform is not going to come from the government. It's got to come from inside the business world. But you know, basically, you have these guys where if the company does well, they get $200 million. If the company tanks, they got a $100 million golden parachute, and they're covered no matter what. So not only is it a general lack of compassion, but it's a lack of having any sort of real accountability,
Mm-hmm.
not only to your customers and to citizens, but also to your shareholders. And the insurance industry, talking about State Farm as an example, this 47% rate increase, while they're still posting record profits, it's a good example of why we're not going to see the kind of reform that you're talking about unless we have representatives in Washington, particularly in Washington, that can get away from having to depend on this money.
Well, first of all, I don't know if you're aware, and I don't know how involved in the insurance you got as far as all of that goes. The state of Florida has offered reinsurance to the insurance companies at a much less expensive rate. But a lot of the insurance companies are still choosing to purchase reinsurance from their parent companies at a much higher rate, so they're still keeping the money in the loop. It's not going elsewhere. It's staying within, so they're double profiting from it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's one of the things that I have a real problem with as far as things go. And you know, I know Governor Chris really thought about doing this, but if the big companies don't want to play by the rules, they need to just leave. Instead of saying, okay, we don't want to write homeowners anymore, say, okay, you don't write homeowners anymore, you don't write auto anymore, you don't write commercial anymore, you don't write any of this stuff anymore. Because you know what? Homeowners is not where anybody makes any money. Auto is where everybody makes money. And then, you know, the same thing with the commercial stuff. You're talking higher dollars, so yes, there's probably a little more profit built in there as far as that goes. But, you know, it's going to take a little bit of the government getting tough with these guys instead of them saying, we don't want to play anymore, so we're going to take our ball and go home. Say, fine, take your ball and go home. You know, and then it gives everyone an attitude adjustment. Because you know what, if Allstate, State Farm, Hartford, Nationwide, those of them that decided they don't want to write homeowners anymore, if they left the state, there's still insurance companies there that can compete. Put some kind of cap on the auto so that certain other insurance companies don't try to take advantage of the mass exodus out by trying to jack up rates and making it too expensive for people. Put some kind of cap on it, saying the rates have to stay what they are.
Yeah, this is something I want to take a look at. Got me interested now. I want to take a look at some of what the federal policies are on some of these insurance issues, because this is you know, one thing that I have been looking into quite a bit lately is for obvious reasons is the way that the mortgage market is regulated, and it sounds to me like we have a very similar situation where there's a real lack of oversight that's letting these companies ride roughshod. Not only over their customers, but also over states. Because the situation, like you were talking about, like it would seem to me that it would make sense for there to be a regulation in place that says that you go with the best reinsurance rate, that provides the lowest premiums. That doesn't seem too draconian to me, to have a requirement like that. To say if the state reinsurance rate is lower than the corporate rate, then you're mandated to go with the state rate because that's going to give people the better premiums. And I'm just, that's kind of off the top of my head. That's something I have to look into in a little more detail. But something like that doesn't seem at all out of the question. It's like a lot of the issues with mortgages. And, there's a lot of very simple regulations that, had they been in place.
Well, it's just like I used to have a travel agency. I grew up in travel. My grandfather had one. I started working for him when I was 13 years old. When the airlines got deregulated, that's when they started getting all messed up. Same thing with the banks. When they got deregulated, that's when you started seeing the banks go under and all these other things happening. And, I understand the democratic society and everything like that, but maybe we need some general rules for businesses to follow too, so that there isn't all of this, I can do what I want and there is no accountability. I don't have to do anything. I can do whatever I feel like doing.
Every industry that's deregulated, it's been a disaster.
Well, I happen to know somebody who was a pilot for Delta. They've taken away his entire retirement plan now. How can you do that? I've got cousins that worked for GM that have recently retired. I've had another client who called me recently to assist him with some insurance. He's with GM. They're pulling his entire package from him. He is no longer going to have all of his health insurance and dental and everything else covered like they agreed to when he retired. How can these companies change the rules of the game in the middle of it?
And again, there's nobody. My family came from Ohio, so I know I'm familiar with the excesses that happened in the unions. But the problem is, excuse me, starting with the 80s, I think we have less than 7% of the workforce now is represented by a union. And granted, unions aren't always the best institutions in the world, but now there's nobody that's really looking out for workers' rights. There's nobody. There's no institution out there that's really protecting the workers, and so you have situations like that. I have cousins who worked for Delphi. Delphi didn't need to go bankrupt. The reason that they went bankrupt is because it allowed them to restructure their benefits packages and to cut salaries in half, literally in half, because of the bankruptcy, and that.
Excuse me just one second. Angie, I don't know if those are done. We had to stop for the meeting that we were having. I'm sorry.
But that's, like you said, that's an example of people changing the rules in the middle of the game. And there's nobody, there are a few people in Congress there, certainly, but by and large there's no institutions anymore that really are looking out for workers that seem to have any voice in Washington.
And aren't there laws out there that are supposed to keep the big businesses from changing the pensions once they've, and controlling the pension money so that the pension money doesn't disappear somewhere?
In theory, the problem is slowly those laws have been whittled away over the last 20, 25 years because the people that are getting the representation in Washington are the ones that have the biggest money, and by and large those are the corporations that are making these changes. And this is a problem that we see across the board. One of the things that a lot of people in this area, a lot of people across the country are concerned with is the erosion of civil rights that's been happening over the last 7 years. And we don't have a fascist state right now by any stretch of the imagination, but a lot of changes have been made in the law, in the habeas the habeas corpus requirements. So many things have been changed that it would be very easy for another president to come in, to have a crisis reel or manufactured, to kick all of these laws into place, or to make all of these laws more prevalent that are already in place. And this is what happens in the labor market. It's what happens in every market. If we're not vigilant, if we're not watching our representatives over time, we get bored with the process that's going on in Washington, and then one day our house gets washed away and we find out that the insurance coverage we thought that was going to cover it doesn't cover it, and there's nobody minding the store to make sure that those companies are being held accountable to
Well,
that.
it kind of goes back to, and not to keep comparing everything to insurance, but insurance laws are so complicated. That's why people have to go to insurance agents, because the normal person can't understand it. It doesn't need to be this complicated. If they would just simplify things, it would make it so that more people understood. One of the biggest things that I have a question in is, why did all of those people in New Orleans not have flood insurance? It was available to them. If you have a mortgage, your mortgage company requires you to carry them. Why is the government making itself so complicated that it makes it difficult for the regular person to be able to understand?
Yeah. And that, again, that's a good example. I mean, so many people, you saw this during Charlie, so many people thought they had the right kind of coverage, and then come to find out that they weren't covered. And it's a lack of disclosure. It's a lack of clarity. And again, you can look at a similar problem within the mortgage market. Is I'm not for, certainly I wouldn't want to see the government fixing rates necessarily, but I would like to see when you sit down and there should be a simple disclosure form that says, this is what you're going to pay this year, this is what you're going to pay in 2 years, this is what you're going to pay over the total, the total of your mortgage. And that's not happening. And people go in situations like insurance and mortgages, and they're making these very complex, very big, important decisions without having a clear understanding of what the process is. So I think that's one area where the federal government can definitely step in, is not in forcing insurance companies or forcing mortgage companies to apply certain rates, but in making sure that there's the transparency there, that they have to have full disclosure of everything that they're doing with their customers.
Well, now that we're talking about the mortgages, one of the big things that I have kind of a question about is, why did the federal government let these people sell these kind of loans when they knew that there was going to be a problem somewhere down the line? It may not happen tomorrow or it may not happen next month, but somewhere down the line all of these people were going to get themselves in such trouble that, I mean, I know nobody expected everything to happen on the magnitude that it's happened, but by the same token, yeah.
I did.
but by the same token, these very intelligent financial minds should have known at some point that it was going to get as bad as it's gotten. Why did they not stop it, or at least put some kind of regulations on there that slowed the chaos? Or why? I don't understand how it happened.
Well, a lot of that has to do with good old-fashioned greed. The fact that everybody was making money, everyone was coming out ahead, from the buyers, that were buying homes that they couldn't afford, but we're seeing prices going up, to the brokers who sold them the loan without checking their credentials, to the manager who okayed it, to the people that were selling off the derivatives. Everybody was making money, so nobody was questioning it. But there is a philosophy that it's kind of prevalent in a lot of politics, that we're always going to experience perpetual growth, and certainly we saw this in Southwest Florida, that things are going well now and things will always go well. And I'm an optimist. I think at the end of the day, things are going to continue to expand outward. Things are going to continue to grow, but there's a natural cycle within that growth of ups and downs. It's a natural tide, and when people are making money like that, that greed factor kicks in. And if you don't have people in government who can step outside of the business world, who can step outside of the corporate world and say, look, our job, the job of the private sector, the job of the business world is to make money. We respect that, and we want to make sure that that's what they can do. But the job of government is to make sure that the general welfare is always looked after. And the general welfare, more often than not, is going to be everybody making money, but sometimes the general welfare means that you've got to make sure that you put the brakes on this boom and bust cycle that we've been seeing over the last, really, you can go back to the S&L crisis in the late 80s, you can go to the dot-com. Basically every 10 years we're having a boom and bust cycle, and each one gets progressively worse. We had the S&L situation, then we had the dot-com situation, now we've got the mortgage credit crunch. Well, we've got the mortgage crisis now, and we're entering into, I think, the household credit crunch, which is coming up next, which is going to be another big drag.
Thanks.
Again, I really am an optimist.
Yeah.
The situation can get better, but we've got to make sure that someone is minding the store, and that someone can look past those short-term quarterly profits and say, okay, what does the country as a whole need?
Well, it's just like we have this one builder here in town that was getting everybody done and building them houses and financing the houses for the people and getting them done, then selling their mortgages. And everything was escalating every year. The payments doubled or went up significantly, at least 50%. But nobody stopped them from selling to all of these people who could barely make the initial payments, let alone the next year when the payments went up 50%, and the next year after that when they went up another 50%. And that's how the mortgages were built. But like I said, a lot of people don't understand those kinds of things, and it's all about, I know what you're saying, it's all about the greed of the people that are selling it to them and getting them in over their heads to start with and everything else. But, you know, why wasn't there somebody saying, you know, you can't do that? I mean, that's not being fair to you, it's not being fair to the people, it's not fair to everybody else who's going to be looking at that abandoned house that's on their street, you know.
This is what we got to change. And I think, particularly for this district, if I felt that we had somebody in office here representing this district now that had that frame of mind, I wouldn't be running. But I think this is the problem that we have, is that Congressman Mack is of the, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say pro-business. But he's sort of in the mindset of business uber alles, of the market uber alles sort of mindset. And again, you know, wanting there to be reasonable regulation is not anti-capitalist, it's not anti-market, it's just saying that for the long-term health and for the general welfare of everybody involved, we don't need to have a situation where 2% of the population gets wildly wealthier and wealthier, and 98% of the population is steadily seeing their income decline. And that's what we have now, and that's what we've got to change.
Hi, Pedro.
Is it 5 o'clock?
This is Katie from LA.
A little bit after.
A little bit after?
Yeah.
We're closed for the day. I'm gonna have to
So
come
you
in
guys
the
are going to be
morning.
at the forum tonight?
Yes, we will be at the forum tonight.
There was one thing that I wanted to get you guys to talk about, and that was I know you do a lot of work, obviously going to the forum now and the politics in the park, and you also work with the community council. And what are some of the difficulties that you're seeing in getting the people involved in the process? I mean, you know, getting people to come down, sit to the table, and figure out, okay, you know, we're going to participate in the democracy, and this is how, you know.
Well, I think that we are steadily seeing. This is the first time that I've been involved in this. That I really think that we are starting to get the people more involved than they have been. I think complacency was there when things weren't going so well, and maybe that's the upside to things not going well right now. Is all of a sudden everybody's getting fired up about it. I don't know. I'm thankful. I'm glad. I think that we definitely have a problem with the younger generation not wanting to get involved. I just found out about 3 days ago that my niece, who is going to be 26, that lives with me, is not registered to vote. Well, needless to say, it's a little bit too early or too late to do anything about the primaries, but she's having a baby on Monday. They just scheduled the C-section today. A week after she has the baby, she's going down and getting registered to vote.
There you go.
But it's all, you know, my opinion doesn't really matter. Well, you know what? It may not. I know there's, like I said, a whole lot of things about politics that I don't understand, but I don't care. I'm going to stand up and scream now anyhow, and if I'm going to make somebody listen to me, you know, and I just hope that a lot of other people do the same thing. Because I think that our government has gotten a little bit out of control. I think that they think they're up here and we're down here and we're not as important. And it's just like the Electoral College, and again, I may be a bit naive in not understanding the entire reasoning for it, But I still don't understand why it's not a popular vote on who gets to be our president, because I thought we were the ones that got to decide, not the Electoral College.
I agree with you there. That's it made sense 200 years ago when it was put into place because it was a compromise. But I mean, we are the only major
Is it under Pedro
democratic
Palacio?
society that doesn't have a direct popular vote. And all of that money that that's going into paying for these campaigns and everything, what people have to realize when they feel powerless is that's designed to influence their vote a certain way. But at the end of the day, that doesn't actually buy their vote. All that is that's influence. And at the end of the day, we're the ones who have the power. We truly, the government truly does work for us. And the government is not a them. The government is in fact us. And as long as people feel hopeless, as long as people feel like they can't make a difference, then we won't be able to change anything. But the minute people realize that you don't have to be a millionaire to go to Washington, that you don't have to own the airwaves to get your message out, that if we can actually work together and we can come to a consensus about what needs to happen, then we can make the changes. And I see this, I come from more of a progressive background in terms of my politics, and this is not by and large a very progressive area. But one of the things that I've found is I talk to a lot of people who consider themselves to be, libertarians, and I can go down the list, and 4 out of 5 issues they agree 100% with where the progressives are coming from, but yet there's this language barrier. They say the same thing, but they say it in 2 different ways, and they say it in 2 different forms, and they're not talking to each other. And one of the things that we're hoping to do with this campaign is we want to bridge that gap a little bit. We're trying to get, progressives, libertarians, we're trying to get people who consider themselves Democrats or Republicans to look beyond those labels and to realize that there are changes that we have to make, and we can make those changes, but we've just got to step past this role that's been imposed on us by big money politics, by the media, and say, look, we're the ones in charge, not these guys.
Now, isn't Congress right now trying to be nonpartisan, more or less, and trying to work together?
Bipartisan.
Bipartisan.
This is the word that always drives me crazy, because
That's what
I would think non would be a better
Exactly.
word for it.
Exactly. What we need is nonpartisan solutions, not bipartisan solutions. And whenever they talk about fixing things, they always say it's a bipartisan issue or it's a bipartisan solution. And the implication there is that we have the control. It's about the Republicans and the Democrats and nobody else. And for those guys in Washington, that means not the Republican and Democratic voters, but the party leaders.
Well, and I think that they need to really take a look at that too, because I think we're in the same generation that's starting, at least with our generation, if not before us. We don't care if we're Republican or Democrat or whatever. It really doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that we're going to always go with one and always go with the other. So I think that the thinking definitely needs to change in Congress.
And again, this is the issue of having a few extremists. You have these ideological extremists on both the Democratic and Republican parties who set the party agenda, and their entire life revolves around that extreme ideology. So their entire mindset is locked in this internal struggle between Republicans and Democrats, and the rest of us are looking at these guys going, look, I don't care if it's a Republican or Democratic solution, I want a solution.
Yeah, nobody's always right. Nobody's always wrong. I mean, they really need to throw away the labels, I think. And I mean, I understand they're there for a reason, but when they walk through those doors to make decisions about things, they need to just be a person who's trying to do what they can for their people. So.
That's all I had.
Okay, cool.
That's great. Thanks so much for talking
Thanks.
to us.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate it. I hope it was helpful.
Absolutely, and I definitely, this is,
they
you've given me a
they
new
just
mission.
changed the
I really want to take a look at
increased
some of these
it
insurance
$3.
regulations and see what we can do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because this is, I'll be honest, this is kind of an issue that a lot of people have brought up with me, and I just haven't felt really well grounded enough to actually go
Well, and
take
like
a
I
look
said,
at it.
I mean, I'm certainly not the insurance commissioner and have all the answers on everything and how it works and how it has to work and how it's supposed to work and all that kind of thing. But I've been doing this for a long time, so
How long have you been doing this?
since
January.
1991, so pretty long time.
And this is, this is what you have to do. And again, this is what's missing from the decision-making process.
Mhm.
Is in order to understand the situation, you've got to talk to everybody.
One,
If
one
you want to
step
know what's
in the
going on in a
building.
factory, you talk to the floor employees, you talk to the foreman, you talk to the supervisors, then you talk to the executives.
Well, and everybody's got their own version of
Yep.
how it happened.
And you got to be able to, you've got to understand the whole process to put that together. If you leave out
Yes.
any one of those steps, you're going to miss
Yes.
something. You know, and the step that's being left out now is, I think, the people who are dealing with it on a day-to-day
Okay.
basis on the ground level.
Mhm.
You too, okay.
In a lot of industries, they're not the ones who are being heard. And hopefully we can fix that.
Cool. Well, I appreciate everything.
Thanks again.
I will see you guys in a
Thank
little
you.
while.
Yeah, see you tonight.
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, wearing the suit will actually make more sense.
Yeah, well.